Good morning. Thanks for coming. I should tell you also that we're recording all of these this year, all these forums, and they're I can find them, but I never remember how I find them. They're up on the big the access cable. They have a YouTube channel, and so they're all there. So I tell people you can check out this one and the Pierce Devotion Baker one and see if I'm at least consistent, right, in what I'm saying, because they're all there. So thanks for coming. So we're here till 9 because there's a class in here at 9. So we'll finish right then. Let me say a couple things and then sort of open it up for what you want to talk about, okay? So the world that I live in right now, right? Space and budgets, right? So let me mention a little bit about those, but try to make sure I talk about actually why we spend so much time talking about budgets, because it isn't just about budgets, right? So the space issue I'll start with. I mean, we've been really enmeshed in this sort of short-term space and issue, and the short-term space issue primarily impacts Devotion and Pierce and Baker schools, where if you've looked at that document that we created, I mean, those schools are out of space, and there's more sections coming that we actually don't have room for. The other schools, every school's overcrowded, right? Every school has adults working in spaces that are, from my view, not satisfactory. Every space has common spaces that are overburdened. But those three schools, the characteristic that they share is that they're out of space for classrooms, and they have more sections coming. So that's been the focus. Devotion's a little different in that there's a renovation and addition project coming. That's coming in 2 years, in 16-17 school year, but we're actually out of space for next year. So our goal has really been to figure out what's the role of Old Lincoln School in all this, and then worry about Devotion first, and then fill in the other pieces after that. And so we've focused on a plan that actually moves Devotion 7th and 8th grade to Old Lincoln School next year, and moves the 5th and 6th along with them the following year, so that during the course of the renovation, 5 through 8 will be housed there. And then we're looking at whether K through 4 is going to remain on the Devotion campus during a renovation project, which does two things. It makes it more expensive, and it makes it a longer project. Or whether we can find another location, not in Brookline. Or I guess I should say, given some of the conversations that we've had, another location or locations where we could move K through 4, create a totally empty space, which means it'll be less expensive and done a year sooner, right? So those are the trade-offs. But what that does is it pretty much says that, you know, we've figured out what we're going to do with Old Lincoln through 2018 or 2019, and then we have to deal with Pierce and Baker. And in Pierce and Baker, we've talked about a combination of some rental spaces over near the Pierce School, some places that we're looking at that we believe we can convert into classrooms and offices. And I have this vision that if we rent enough in one of the locations, we could actually create a satellite cafeteria, so we could begin to deal with some of the common spaces on that campus, because we can't right now, that kind of thing. And Baker looks much more like a one-year kind of solution next year, where we might have to move some classes off of the campus, and then for the following year, we'd look at something like portable classrooms, modulars, trailers, call them what you will, on that campus to get us through. But neither of those schools, outside of the discussion about the Driscoll statement of interest that we have in, or the 9th school work that we're beginning, nowhere in that is there a long-term solution. So those are the solutions at those places. And again, through 2020, it's not terribly pretty, but we do believe we have classroom space everywhere else, although we're crowded, right? And our common space issues are a bit of an issue. So you may want to ask, some questions about that. That's one thing. And the second thing that we're spending an awful lot of time on my Tuesday nights with the Board of Selectmen is the override discussion, right? And so the way that where we're at in that is that hopefully January-ish, the Board of Selectmen decide on what a question might look like that they would put before the voters, right? So they've seen a report from the Override Study Committee. They've heard from us what we might be able to do within these two scenarios that the Override Study Committee offered. They've heard from us about the educational program and the technology plan that we've tried to put forward. And just as importantly, they've heard about the capital plans, because there's both an override discussion here and there's a debt exclusion discussion here. Override dealing with operating budget, teachers, technology, et cetera. Debt exclusion dealing with capital. How will we fund the devotion school? How will we fund the next school? If there's another elementary school in that, right? Those kinds of issues. So there's two sets of issues to begin with in terms of capital and operating. And then they'll make a decision, and some of you know about overrides, that right? That doesn't necessarily have to be one question. It could be two questions. The pyramid is one strategy where they ask a particular question and then ask if you want to go further, right? And also fund this, right? And so that's what the Board of Selectmen are in the process of discussing. I'm asked all the time, what can we do? My very simple answer is show up, right? Show up. I mean, for the next 5 or 6 Tuesday nights at 6 or 7 o'clock, whenever they start, the Board of Selectmen are going to be dealing with this in public session. Show up, right? And then they'll be coming up with a question, and then there's a whole political process and all. And I'm not going to go, I can try to answer some questions specifically about educational program, but just keep in mind that, you know, superintendents, I'll say in this case, principals, are restricted in what they can talk about in terms of advocating for overrides. It's a violation of campaign ethics rules and all those kinds of things. So, I mean, what I will say is what we've tried to put forward, and what I think you'll see in the documents that we've put out there is a vision for the educational program, right? So we've talked about staffing and other things in essentially 3 different buckets, right? We've talked about the fact that during this growth, we've not been able to keep up with areas beyond the classroom. So we put forward a plan that looks at guidance counselors, it looks at nurses, it looks at literacy specialists, it looks at math specialists, looks at those supports, looks at ECS, gifted and talented program. It looks at those areas and says, this is what we should be doing. So we believe there's X amount of funding that could go toward those kinds of things. We've put forward some things that they call enhancements, and that's continued work largely around the literacy program that we've started to put in place, and taking that model and using it in a math specialist model so that students get support and our teachers get coaching that they need. And then third, there's a technology plan that we actually started to implement this year. You probably have seen quite an infusion across the schools from the district of technology in classrooms this year. That's not an accident. That's phase 1 of what was really a 4-year technology vision that makes sure teachers have the equipment that they need. It envisions students, at least at our high school and probably at our middle levels, having a one-to-one type program. It envisions classrooms being equipped so that teachers have access to the outside world and things beyond books in their classrooms. And that's all part of that plan. So we think we've put forward an educational vision of what people in this town expect of their public schools. And that just translates then into this is where we think the funding levels would need to be in order to carry out that vision. So why don't I stop there, right? And sort of open it up for what you want to talk about within that or anything else. And if you want to talk about something beyond that, I'd be thrilled, by the way.
You didn't mention the high school.
Oh, sure, thank you. Oops. So, no, well, that's, and one of the reasons why, right, it's a great question. Thank you so much. No, it really is a great question. I really appreciate it. It's not a conversation within this 3-year override question that's being considered. But, so we've been working for the last 6, 8, 10 months on a concept study, right, at the high school. And it's been less focused on building and much more on program. In other words, what are we trying to achieve here? And then how does that fit into a high school that is going to be 2,600 students? If just pay attention to the numbers that are actually already here.
What's it?
17, 18. Right? So that's big. And is that even one high school? I mean, all those questions are on the table, right? And if it is one high school, does that mean that there isn't sort of schools within school kind of approach to it? I mean, there are all those questions on the table, but they really all come back to, for us, the same thing that the devotion conversation came back to us, and that is, what are we trying to achieve here? And how do we achieve it in a building that's going to be that large, or in a high school population that's going to be that large? So some preliminary discussion out of that study. We brought on a consultant to work with us on that study. There's been a community group that's worked from time to time with that study. Preliminary discussion, recommendations, if you will go to the school committee in January to begin that conversation. And then where we get is really to the nitty-gritty. So that's the partnership with the Massachusetts School Building Authority. Because what we owe on an annual basis is something called a statement of interest. Meaning, this is our highest priority, right? And we would like you, the Massachusetts School Building Authority, to partner with us on this project. Meaning we'd like you to pay for some of it, right? So every year we have to do that, and even if we want to just re-up whatever we have in as the statement of interest, we have to submit it again. So you probably know, if you follow this, that we've had the Driscoll project out of the B-Space conversations in that. And we haven't gotten an okay on that statement of interest yet. So there is no project beyond devotion right now. And quite frankly, I mean, I expect that the parties that are involved in approving this, that we will move to a high school, the high school as our main priority, our statement of interest, when we have to resubmit in April. So the high school will then become our priority, which means that we're saying that project, which we think is coming for 2019-ish, right, is where we are in terms of our priority right now. And if we have to do something elementary-wise in between, we're either going to A, not do it in between, or B, we're going to do it on our own, because there's not going to be a participation from the School Building Authority. But remember, they hadn't yet approved this statement of interest. Now, if they, that doesn't mean you wait till 2019. If they were to approve a statement of interest on the high school and say, yep, get started on that, that's terrific, we could submit a different statement of interest the very next year, right? And the advantage we have, so the disadvantage we have is we have already worked with the authority more times than most communities, okay? We've already worked with the School Building Authority more than most communities in the projects that we've done. The advantage that we have is there aren't other communities that are growing like us. There are other communities that talk about growth. Every time I hear of one, I heard of 2 the other day, and I said, oh, that's interesting. Let me go back to the office and take a look at their numbers. They don't look like ours.
Ours are what, 30%?
Well, ours are a lot. I mean, I was 5,600 students when I came here, and today we're just slightly north of 7,600. That's pre-K through 12. So that's a lot, yeah. And a high school, as I said, that's going to go to 20. And the thing that's really difficult about ours, I mean, again, let me bore you with numbers for a minute, is I keep talking every time I come here, I'm sure, about accelerated enrollment growth. Enrollment growth is one thing. I talked to my friend, Paul Ash in Lexington, who says, oh, our kindergarten classes the last number of years, they're up to this compared to what they used to be of this. The difference is that for 4 years, they've moved to this, right? The problem with ours is that's not what's happening. This year's kindergarten class, I think yesterday, was 692. That's the largest class yet, which exceeds a class that came 2 years ago as the largest, which exceeded a class that came the year before, which exceeded a class that came the year before. Okay, get my point? It's accelerated enrollment. So, you know, the numbers keep moving up from, if you look at our master plan from 08, 09, whenever that was done, I mean, they did some forecast of some upper level numbers that quite frankly people looked at and said, that'll never happen. It didn't. We've exceeded it. We've actually exceeded the upper range of their numbers. So, so that's where we are. That's where we are with that discussion. So, which all means that will become. I mean, as we get devotion, I was going to say, as we get devotion put to bed. What does that mean, Bill? As we get devotion moving, in terms of, you know, the actual design, the feasibility study, right? All those kinds of pieces. The attention very quickly will turn to, starting in January, what comes out of this concept study and the discussion around the high school, and what do we have to pursue to begin to look at whatever the options may be, whether they are building more high school on this campus, whether they are looking at alternative sites as another part of the current Brookline High School, or whether they are a separate high school. And the other piece we have to pay attention to, and the reason I emphasize so much this 2019-2018, is we actually need more space at the high school right in that time frame. So the thinking has been historically, get done with devotion, whether it's by 18 or 19, move out of the old Lincoln School and begin to use old Lincoln as what I call, and it's a stretch, folks, another building on the high school campus. Okay, I've enlarged the campus slightly, but you know what I mean, another building. And for those of you who lived through a discussion, you know, when it was the 9th grade school, and say, oh, is that what you're going to do with it? The answer is no, that's not what we're going to do with it, because actually the 9th graders by that time won't fit. So it's going to have to be something. It's going to play an important part in the educational program of the high school, but I can't tell you yet what that is, because it's no one grade level. Does that help? Thanks. Thanks for asking me that.
I'm not sure how to phrase this question, but so there's massive needs for expansion in multiple schools, and then there's this kind of a need for a big picture vision. And I'm, like, for example, a 9th K-8 school. So I'm just wondering about sort of timing of things. Like, are we going to put a ton of money into these expansions and then concurrently try to then put money into an entirely new school? Like, because obviously if we're going to do the new school, we might as well just bite the bullet and do the new school, and then you don't have to do all this minor expansion.
No, it's a really great question. So, so the dual challenge that we've had, right, is finding short-term strategies, particularly at the places that I just talked about, while not spending a lot of money. So, for example, if you look at that plan that we put out, and by the way, we really liked this idea in a lot of ways, right? One idea at Pierce was to convert the Sperber Center, which is where our coordinators are housed, to classrooms. And we looked at it in a rough fashion, and we could create 3 or 4 classrooms or whatever. And it was about $3.5 million, right? So that's a good idea, but it runs into some of what you just laid out, right? You're going to spend $3.5 million to take an overcrowded school and make the common spaces even more overcrowded. What's your long-term exit strategy, right? So when we began to have some opportunities to look at rental, that became more attractive to us because we can walk away from that, right? We can spend much less money in terms of the rental and the conversion of that space. And then when we have this longer-term solution, which will result in some, I mean, a 9th school put anywhere, you know from some of those peace-based conversations, results in some redistricting down the road, right? But we can walk away from those things. Modulars, quite frankly, are inexpensive enough that you can walk away from them. You haven't, you haven't just done a number of these Lawrence-type projects where you've built 4 classrooms onto the building, and right? So that's been our dual challenge, and we actually think this latest plan does that.
But the piece that makes people okay with that temporary cheap
It's
solution
a long-term plan.
having something to
Yeah.
save the vision, which we don't have, and we really struggled last year and didn't get very far, even though it was a really hard struggle.
No, right, and so, so hopefully that's why the school committee and the Board of Selectmen put out this request. That's why they're back to looking at whether there's another space for another school, because I think if you go way back in the annals of the B space, I mean, people agreed up front that a ninth school was the best solution. They just couldn't, in the limited way they looked at it, that's not a criticism, but in the way they looked at it, they couldn't identify that. And the hope is now we'll be able to.
Good. I'd love to hear more about that effort.
Yeah, and again, we're just getting started with that. So I can say it's getting started. The requests have been put out. They think they've identified a group to do, right, those kinds of things. So, but that's all the further we are with that right now. Yes, sir?
So what changed between like 5 or 6 years ago when we all said, ninth school, the space committee, they went out, they were restricted what they could do, they came out with what we heard, the conclusions, and now there's a new opportunity for a next school. What's really changed since then and now?
So my particular view is it's a couple things, right? So my particular view is that the numbers have continued to accelerate, right? And that the growth is shifted in some ways, right? So, let's talk about Driscoll for a second. Let's talk about that Driscoll solution, which is a fine solution in a number of ways. There are some people who don't agree, but it's a fine solution. But when you look at now where the enrollments are, because enrollments have picked up over the last number of years, much more in South Brookline than what we were seeing when we were doing the examinations of these pieces. And, we have this elephant in the room of a Hancock Village project, which is going to add to that in numbers that, and by what, in numbers that we don't know, we have some suspicions, and by a year that we don't know, because we don't know how quickly this is going to play through the courts and the different bodies it has to go in front of. But what we know right now is that even in terms of what we're seeing, South Brookline numbers have accelerated over the last couple of years. So, some people have said, well, the Driscoll solution didn't help with that at all. That's not true, right? That's not true. They did require shifting. So I'll give you a couple of examples, right? So we have a buffer between Driscoll and Runkle, right? Last year, in terms of kindergarten alone, you can look this up. It's on our website. I put it out a couple times. I think there were 15 students in that buffer, and they all went to Runkle. Well, in an enlarged Driscoll scenario, they all go to Driscoll. And students from a Heath Runkle or Baker Runkle student buffer who maybe go to Baker now go to Runkle. It's a shifting, right? That's how it's dealt with. Some people have said, well, that's not as good as a solution where you put a school where the numbers are. Well, right. Okay. So I think a reason is that the numbers have, I think the main reason is we've seen a shift in where those populations are. They were much more, if you go back to the B-Space reports, we were looking at numbers that were much more North Brookline centered. Well, we're still seeing that, right? Take a look at my, and I know some of you have, take a look at my Pierce, Lincoln, Lawrence, Devotion buffers. There are a lot of numbers there, but there's also now a very significant number in the Baker population with much more to come. And I think that's what's changed. Yes?
Would you guys be then looking at potential of having a 9th and a 10th new elementary then with the South Brookline?
Is it 9 o'clock yet?
I mean, when I was reading the info that I've seen so far about Hancock Village, it sounds like as far as numbers, that potentially could be an additional school in South Brookline as well.
Yeah, we've done some of the numbers. We've looked at some of the numbers. And I think we're in the mid-100, 200, mid-150-ish, 200 level. I mean, one of the things we're really trying to get a handle on is when, because I mean, I've taken asking questions at those discussions, staff discussions of when do we think we'll have students walking down the street to the Baker School? I mean, the rest of this is noise to me. Tell me when there's going to be students grabbing a backpack and walking to school, right? Some people have said 1920, the 1920 school year, something like that. You know, if played right, no, I think if played right, and again, we haven't done anything specific with these numbers. I think if played right in terms of whatever the size is and the location of that, no, I think there are strategies where a 9th school could do that. You may have to do something else at Baker School. We've had discussions about that as well.
Bill, have you thought about a kindergarten language immersion program study abroad?
That reminds me a number of years ago when this all started, a parent came to me and said, I have a perfect idea to solve all this. I said, what's that? She said, I think we should send all the 8th graders abroad. Starting with mine, she said. Yeah.
It would be less expensive.
It probably would be. What else? Yes, sir.
So, having been involved a little bit with B-Space over the last few years, I had thought that the Driscoll plan was a really good one.
Yeah.
And I just want to do a plug for Lincoln.
Yep.
Lincoln publicly disagreed with the architect's report respectfully, and said that we'll do our fair share. And if you need to put an addition on here,
Yep.
as you know, and the school committee and the selectmen know, we said as a community that we would put an addition on.
Right.
And I know that's not possible, but we still went on the record sincerely that we would do it. If the Driscoll, the statement of interest that's with the MSBA now, doesn't go through, I don't know the technical jargon, do they get put to the back of the bus and other things take precedence, not just the high school, but other communities? And does the Driscoll idea all of a sudden, not in your control, lie dormant?
So, good question. So, the way it works is every April, any community interested in a project has to submit a statement of interest, even if it means submitting the same statement of interest that they submitted last year. So they all become essentially null and void, right, every March-ish. So what they are asking us to do, and every community who's interested in a project, is tell us your top priority, right? And the discussion would be, I think, and has been to some extent already, you know, is the Driscoll project or some other elementary project our top priority for a submission in April or 15, or does it need to move to now being Brookline High School? And I'm just characterizing the discussion, which I think has been, I think we need to move to Brookline High School, right? Now, that doesn't mean that what comes out of, I'm not pretending I know what comes out of a 9th school discussion, right? It could be a look at some of our other schools and the diagnosis that there's additional space and capacity to do something there, and that in fact becomes the 9th school. It could be another piece of property or a series of properties, and these are your opportunities to use those properties, and these are the obstacles that you would face in using those properties. What I know is we would move for now to saying the high school issue, our 9 through 12 issue, is now our top priority that we're going to have to deal with solving with our partners at the MSBA. And then we're going to have to double back to whether that means, yep, after all this investigation, it's still the Driscoll project. That still is the one that does it for us. Or it's that and something else. Or it's, nope, it now belongs as something at Baker, or something on some piece of property that we don't presently control. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm.
That's the conversation. Yes, sir.
So are you envisioning both a high school project and a 9th school, or would you say that either one or the other will most likely happen in the next 5 years?
Oh, you added that. Well, definitely the high school. And again, you looking at our projections of enrollment numbers, you know, if the whole 9th idea is somewhat beyond that, we have other concerns, other issues. But financially, that's a big ask. That's a big ask. And I'm not talking about simply debt exclusions of the community. That's a big ask within the town's capital improvement plan. So that would be challenging without additional, I mean, so this discussion, that question, really leads you to why people say, and I think we need to be very honest and say, you know, the Override Study Committee said, the Board of Selectmen are saying, the school committee is saying, this is the first of probably a number of asks to the community, to the voters. I mean, there's nothing about the high school, there's very little about high school staffing in this override. This is 3 years and the real growth doesn't begin to kick in until there's some, but there's not much, right? So there could be some series of, you know, and in fact one of their discussions was, do you do it that way or do you do a 5 to 7 year ask and the numbers bit right? I mean, what do you do with this? And
Some scope around that, so if we do 5 to 10 years out, what kind of numbers are we looking at?
So the operating sort of vision that we put out, which took into account again some certain assumptions about the high school and staffing that was necessary, I think that was in the $15–16 million range.
And that's over what time?
That was between now and I believe 2022. Okay? Maybe I should hedge it and say between 15 and 18. It was in those ranges, right? And that's not capital, right? So you're talking about a devotion project, again, some of which is in capital improvement plan and some of which is an ask. It's 115 million now. It becomes less expensive if we are able to shave that year off, right, and move all the students out. That's the range of the numbers. I mean, a high school project is hard to even suggest. I mean, I think it's certainly, if it's just adding classrooms here, it's an $80 million project, $60 to $80 million project minimum.
What did Newton end up spending?
A lot more than that on a new high school.
Yeah.
On a new high school, yes.
So I edit the Lincoln Lines, which is the weekly newsletter to parents, and I guess I would love to hear what you would think parents need to know about all this. There are so many moving parts, and I know that Lincoln isn't directly affected, but
I think it is.
Okay, so it is affected, and I feel that because there are so many moving parts, it's overwhelming to understand how to get involved. I really like how you have said, you know, show up on the Tuesday meetings. Are there any other things parents should know or be able to do so that they can feel involved and understand the process, which is very complex and sometimes hard to really get your head around?
And ideally, you'd write the piece for Lincoln.
Thank you. I'm asking you to do my work, but no, but I mean, I'm sitting here and I'm thinking, how do I even approach this to all the parents who were not able to come? And I think that one of the problems is that it's so big that a lot of parents kind of just put up their hands and say, you know.
Right. So I think it starts with boiling it down to, you know, when people ask me a number of times, what do I get out of this? What do my kids get out of this? What does my school get out of this?
Absolutely.
Right? So in terms of the override, I think that's very clear. I mean, I think I laid it out in sort of the broad categories earlier, right? So this building is just like every other building in that I've come here for some number of years and I've said, listen, we've grown as a district, and what we've been able to do is keep up with classroom teachers, period. Right? That's what we've been able to do. And I said in every budget, you can go back and read them, it's in every budget message, that was the priority. Right? Those class sizes, which have moved by, in all this growth, our elementary class sizes have moved by 1.5 students per class. Right? And I'm proud of that. And I'm also bothered by it. Because there's a call, and what I've said to the town administrator, the Board of Selectmen over and over again, and let me now explain to you the cost of that. The cost of that is I have buildings of 500 and 600 students that used to be 350 that have the same nursing staff, that have barely moved in the literacy specialist and math specialist staff, right? that have barely moved in terms of, did I say nursing and guidance? So those those categories haven't moved. Until last year, we'd not added anyone in any school in any of those categories in that entire time period. And that begins to show, right? So by the way, if I went back 8 years, I'd do it exactly the same way. And I'd be sitting here saying, but it begins to show, right? There's a critical point. And as I told the Board of Selectmen, we're past it. It's too late. So now we need to do something about it so that we can drive those kinds of positions to support. The other thing that I think troubles me about this, the building issue, is too many times and this is not direct, but I'll come back to your question, is this issue of where adults work. So I actually said to the Board of Selectmen the other night that, you know, if we end up passing an override, and next year you go into the devotion school and the ELL teacher is still working with kids in the hall, that's a great visual, isn't it? But that's what we've done. We've not created adequate spaces for the adults to do their work. We've worried about classrooms. Are there enough classrooms? Well, we have a guy in the building department, his name's Charlie Simmons. We call him the magician because he's made classrooms out of all kinds of spaces, and it's wonderful, except it's not, right? Because we continue to have, and by the way, if we add all these people, that's going to get worse because there'll be more people in the same size spaces. But so for me, and I think these other projects, let me do it this way. So one of the initial, and please, this sounds like I'm participating in pitting one school against another. I'm not. I'm merely telling you the kinds of conversations I end up in and what I need to say to people. So people said to me about the Baker problem when we were talking about moving 7th and 8th grade, right? They said, don't do that. We don't want to do that. We want our K-8 school together. Every school says that to me over and over again. And I hear it. So they said, all you need to do to fix this is take those people that are in the buffers between our school and Lincoln, our school and Heath, our school and Runkle, and send them there. And I said, have you looked at their numbers? There isn't room there either. So what does this increased capacity that we'll spend some dollars on do? It allows us to continue to handle the problem without having to shove it. So I think there's a lot in this for every school.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm happy to look at it and add to it if you want me to. I can't write it right now. I'm up to here, okay? But I'm happy to look at it and help edit it and add some things to it if you'd like me to. I'm happy to do that.
There may be other questions. I just want to say, I don't think you've been here since we have our new principal.
Yes.
Principal. I know you've been here for about 8 or 9 years before that, listening to grumblings and
Once in a
things that were
while.
going on.
Grumblings are part of the job.
I think it's important to say thank you for Andrew and for Brian. Because,
Thanks.
yeah.
Thanks. That's nice to hear. We're glad to have him here. He's a great member of our team. Yes, sir.
Just out of curiosity, what is the range? I have no concept of the smallest number of enrollment to the largest. So devotion's quite the largest, right?
Depends on the day. There's this funny little contest going on between the three where the principals sometimes report to me by the day to tell me that they're now larger than the other one. It's really that close. It's Pierce, Devotion, and Baker all in the 810 to 825 range.
It goes down to the smallest.
Isn't it more of an issue over capacity?
Pardon?
Isn't it more of an issue of enrollment compared with capacity of an
Yeah,
facility?
so the answer to your question, then the yes, right? So the answer to your question is 560-ish, Runkle-ish, Heath maybe right in that range. I mean, and again, for comparison's sake, when I came to the district, Driscoll School and Heath School were 350 kids, right? Devotion was 700, right, and was the largest school in the district. So, but it's really a matter of sections, right? It's really a matter of sections, and what's increased dramatically. What's actually happened, if you just, it's very simple. It's very simple and very complicated. Is all of the 3-section schools are kind of now, at least have some 4s. All the 4-section schools, all the 2-section schools became 3s. Driscoll, 2-section school, now all 3s. All the 3-section schools have moved toward 4s, and all the 4-section schools are mainly 5s and have some 6s in them. That's how it's played out, and that's where the room, and we've consumed all the adult workspace for classrooms. Sir, you had your hand up.
Yeah, so following my question perfectly. So we're a 3-section school with 1 bump of 4 in 2nd
Yep.
grade. And thank goodness, right, the last class came in 3, because I don't think there's another classroom to bump, the next bump, right? I think we're pretty much maxed out, unless this becomes a classroom here. So
I rejected that idea at Baker, so.
yeah, I'm
Yeah.
joking.
Well,
We know.
some people out there weren't, so I rejected the idea, so.
But, and obviously we've talked about there's no place to add around here, you just have no building. So you talked about predictions for next year.
Yes.
Do you see this district at risk of having to add a 4th section in kindergarten, or are we good for next year or 2?
So the good news about creating that capacity, so what we've done is we've made an assumption, forget about the number of students, because people say, well, if you've assumed 650, which is what we assumed in the override discussions, the latest override discussions, you know, you have 680, 690, you just said you're already short on that. Yeah, but we've assumed the same number of sections that we have now, 31, right? So if we assume 31 sections and we assume that there's a little bit of volatility in that, but that they largely end up where they are now, no. And the good thing about what we're doing at Pierce and Baker is we've actually created capacity to make sure we can continue to take 5s there, which is what leads to you sort of being 3, right? So it has impact here as well, and it has impact on our ability to sustain Heath as a 3 and those kinds of things. So no, I think our sectioning's about right. Yep.
So just sort of the 9 school summary is there's a group meeting to look into that again.
The consultants.
They have a deadline, and even if they were to come up with an idea, we're going forward with temporary rentally-like fixes for a number of years because we need to focus on the high school as a capital improvement project before any net 9th K-8. Is that?
So let me try pieces of that. Yes. So there's a consultant that's been hired or is in the process of being hired that is charged specifically with looking at all of the places in town, places that we control and that we don't, and laying out for us what the opportunities might be and what it would take to get to those opportunities. So I'll pick. So people have said to me, you know, the Stop and Shop would be a great location for a school. That may be true, right? But there are costs associated with taking the Stop and Shop. They just don't say, well, of course, out of the goodness of our heart, you need a school. Of course, you know, you start throwing around terms like eminent domain, and those are not fun terms. And right, so there are properties we don't control. There are properties the town does control that have other issues. For example, I've said it here before, I'm not advocating for it. The town controls, with some rather favorable language toward building something, Lars Anderson. Okay, there's really nothing legal in the gift, if you will, of that property that says you can't build a school there. There are other issues, however, associated with that, right? So that's what they'll do. They'll lay out all of that.
And a lot of that had been done. I mean.
Well, a lot of it had been done by B-Space kind of on the back of an envelope. I think they would even say that.
So then when is this guy's deadline for, or woman's deadline?
Remember
for?
that. Abby Cox, who's one of our school committee members, is here.
I thought the deliverable was March or April.
Yeah, I think that's
So fairly
right.
soon.
Yeah, it's a very quick turnaround.
Right.
So the short-term measures that we're talking about would have to be done anyhow because, quite frankly, we're out of room at Baker next year, and Pierce we need for the following year. So we'd be doing that and spending what is short money if you consider $100,000 here, $150,000. If you think that's short money, I do, right, to solve some problems short-term and to be able to create situations that you can get out of. Those are good strategies. The high school will go in because, quite frankly, we don't have the specific kind of project that we would need to resubmit out of that 9 school idea till beyond when we have to submit the SOI. I mean, in a perfect world, we would submit the high school SOI in April. Sometime at the end of the year, when they take up statements of interest, November, let's say, they would say, absolutely. And they might. To me, it's a clear enough project. It's a clear enough need, right? I think they probably will. And then the following April, we could submit the Driscoll, the 9th school, the add-on to the Bakers, whatever it is, right? And then our problem is, back to your question, is do we have the financial capacity in the capital improvement plan in future debt exclusions to actually do that? So it could begin to unfold quicker than that, right? And I think there's some opportunity, at least in the partnership with the MSBA, for that to happen. It will depend on financial capacity of the town. Yeah, David.
Dr. Lupini, if there was a building for a 9th K through 8 that was empty in the town for rent, would that be an option? And if so, what's the, I have no idea, and I should, but I have no idea. What's the square footage necessary approximately for a 9th K through 8 school?
So we've gone into this just, you know, I think in these discussions, I think what's in the RFP, assuming a 3-section per grade level school. So that's what this is, right? So this, whatever the square, yeah, whatever, size-ish, yes. I mean, one of the problems we're having in Devotion, if you know of some property, I need it right now for Devotion, by the way, okay? So tell me what it is, not, right? So we're looking actually right now outside of, and I'll just be honest,
anyway.
One of the challenges outside of Brookline, right. One of the challenges that we're running into is we're looking for, you know, at the end of the day, we're looking for a building that is 5 grade levels, 5 sections per grade level, 500 kids. I mean, that's not a small undertaking, right? Which is why we're also open to, could 2 grades go to a building here and the other 3 go to a building there? Now, transportation-wise, administratively and all, it's a nightmare, but I keep coming back to it's cheaper, and I've actually now seen some estimates that say it's significantly cheaper. Pardon?
To rent.
No, it's cheaper. The Devotion project becomes less expensive if the kids are out of there.
Sorry.
And it's a year. A year that I pick up in the timeline, right? And that has to at least be thought through really carefully if we have that opportunity. So yeah, that's what it is. That's the kind of space we'd be looking for. And then you want to have, if you're talking about something permanent, you want to have play space associated with it and all, and those kinds of things. And you have to do all the things that B-Space did in terms of playing out what does it look like in terms of how you create, phase in, et cetera, the district that place actually becomes. And you remember from that some places don't play out very well in doing that, and other places play out better.
Just add on quickly to that. So for people that don't know, the town is completely open to, and I'm speaking for the town, if I'm not, cut me off.
Feel free.
That the town is completely open to any ideas.
So
if someone has a crazy idea, don't think it's a crazy idea, send it in.
Right.
And then the second thing is, other communities have come to you and have wanted to, rock solid, rent the old Lincoln.
Yes.
In the past.
Oh yeah.
And you said no because we needed it. But other communities like
well,
we've
rented it out for short-term things, not to schools.
But
we've
rented it out for short-term systems have wanted it.
But we've had 3 that I can, right, opportunities to rent that while people were doing short-term projects, and they wanted it for longer than we could make a commitment to. Yes, exactly to your point, yes. So we did. And actually, I've told people, I have an experience like that. When I was in Beverly, we had closed a building, the Edwards School, near the Salem Bridge. And the Salem School District was doing a renovation project, and they wanted to exit their students out of one of their schools. And they came to us and said, can we rent the Edwards School for 2 years? There were no plans to start whatever the next phase for the Edwards School were going to be at that time. So we rented it to them for 2 years. It was a great partnership. It was a great experience.
I had a
I'm
question.
sorry. I keep.
Sorry.
Let me
Yeah,
go.
go ahead, yeah.
Let me go here because I've gone past you at least 2 or 3 times. I'm sorry. No. Please.
Me, I trying to be the page for the last 5 minutes. I want to come back to the overall budget override.
Yes.
And what activity in the short term it might affect, because there's already saying what activity might be cut down or erased from the school agenda. What is high on the agenda now? What is under threat to be taken out, and how is the decision taken, and how can parents get involved in the decisions?
Right. So the short term is so last week I had to go to the Board of Selectmen and I had to answer the question: suppose there is no override question, or suppose no override passes. Right? And essentially, we can't add. If that's the case, we can't fund year 2 of the technology plan. We can't fund those enhancements to the literacy program, and we can't do most of what has this terrible name of catch-up, meaning we can't add the guidance counselors, the nurses, et cetera. And we'd still have to cut a minimum of $700,000 more from our budget. Okay? Now, let's say for a second I say, which I said to them the other night, that's not acceptable. Okay? I'm going to have to add some of those guidance counselors, nurses, literacy, right? So all I'm doing is driving my deficit deeper. So now my deficit isn't $700,000, it's $1.3 million. Then a program's in danger. And the program that could be, what could be in danger? Well, lots of things. It could be the Elementary World Language program, it could be the ECS program, I mean, it could be a combination of a lot of things that would have to be cut, not for us to necessarily say because we want to do this brand shiny new thing, but because we're left with that deficit. And even at that, the town has stepped in and funded part of that deficit up front. So some people have said, well, the town needs to fund more. Maybe they do. But there'll be cuts on the town side. You saw that in the paper this week. The town administrator said, just to get to this point, I'd probably have to cut the funding that we put into the Brookline Mental Health, right? Or this, or this, or this. So I started the other night with the headline, the no override scenario is bad. That was maybe the understatement of the night. It's not good because, while people will come out and advocate for this program versus this program, at the end of the day, we'd be cutting something like $1 million out of what we do right now. Yes. Oh, and by the way, how do you? So that all starts when we put our budget forward right around the middle of February. So this is really a fun year, one of my favorite kinds of years, in that I have to put forward a no override budget. And then I have to put forward a budget for any question that the Board of Selectmen put on the ballot. So selfishly, I'm hoping they have one question, that they don't have the pyramid. Because if they have the pyramid, that's more budgets that I have to put out, right? So I could end up putting, somebody said to me, you could end up putting 3 or 4 budgets together. Yes. Yes, we could. Does that answer you? So mid-February, we'll have to put a no override budget out, and it will be very unpopular. People will hate it, and they will tell me why I shouldn't have cut, I shouldn't have put this, I should have put this, and if I put that, those people would tell me why I should have done that and not, right? And that's what it's going to be.
So the recommendation goes to the school committee, and the school
Right.
committee holds a hearing.
Right.
That series of hearings.
Yes, ma'am. 4 or 5 minutes yet.
My daughter is starting high school this coming year. Lucky me. And
In 15, 16.
in 15.
Great.
15. Between the space issues of the high school getting bigger, the override question, all that, is it looking like any of the programming at the high school could potentially get cut, like the advanced and honors classes, or
No.
or the various numbers of science classes and things like that?
No. The simple answer is no. And it's much simpler to say, in the time that she's going to be there, no. It's harder for me to make those commitments beyond that. When we get to that 2018, 2019 range, it's harder to commit to that. But that's not where we see even the no override scenario going with the high school. I mean, it could very well be that we need to look carefully at some programs, but in terms of, you know, our ability to offer challenging coursework, absolutely not. I'm not going there. I mean, we did say the other day, just as an example, that in certain scenarios over the next 3 years, we'd be challenged to continue to, I mean, our consultants came in, and they're wonderful. I've worked with them before. They're terrific people and really skilled. And they said, you know, you do offer a wider variety of course offerings at this high school than we see anywhere where we do this kind of work, okay? So let's start there, okay? And I know they just did a project in Lexington, so that's, for example, one of the things Phil was talking to me about, right? There are a wider variety of offerings. There are a wider variety of course offerings in the performing arts, the fine arts, et cetera here, vocational courses, the terrific partnership that we have with the interactive cable access. I mean, those are all courses that are available, animation studios, et cetera, that are available to our kids beyond the traditional upper level academic courses. I'd be more worried about some of that than anything else. And I am worried about that because I think that's what makes a great high school, right? High schools that years ago when MCAS came along boiled their high school down to academics and nothing but academics. I don't want to send my kids there, so I don't want to send your kids there. One more?
Yeah, I'm afraid that. So you, at Lincoln, I would like to come back to Lincoln, but I think it's more a comment that's really a question that you have. It's clearly you mentioned that 9 years ago when you came here, there were 350.
11 almost now.
Anyway, I'm not sure of the number, and I was not.
Who's counting years?
Anyway, so pretty much the population doubled in 10 years, right? And so we all know that the town has been a wonderful job in maintaining the number of students and number of teachers in that per class.
Yep.
But we all know that the unstructured time has been really challenging.
Yep.
Especially for this school, I know, I think. And this is, I understand that this is a continuous process. So with all the issues you are talking about, and I know it has been a great improvement, and you are very thankful to Andrew to really implement different things for this year. Do you see any possibilities for improvement there as well in the near future in terms of, for example, it's true that this corner, there are corners that are makes very strange how they are organized, because when you bring children who have the same interest together, it's also better, it's easier to supervise unstructured time.
Right.
So is there any way, because this corner, I'm thinking about this one, because this is the one that has been in the last years the most remodeled, so there are kind of inconsistency in how it's organized. And I understand there's some urgency.
No, it's a really good point, because
it's nice. I don't want to.
I'm just cognizant of students coming in. Let me say this real quickly. I mean, I think if you take a look at what we've done at Devotion, 1,000-student school, and the way we tried to organize that to make sure that we paid attention to the educational program in the design, we've started to do that. One of the downsides of trying to keep K-8 in the same building together is that if I go to every school, they'll say, yeah, I've got 1 5th grade over there now and the other 4 over, right? And it doesn't work anymore. Is as we get back to some of that, as this planning progresses, right? We've got to take a look at every school and be able to reconfigure some spaces back to where they make educational sense. Because educational sense doesn't always match up with people who say, I want you to keep K-8 in the building, no matter what. And I've actually said to some of them, really? No matter what? Because no matter what means lots of things in terms of where adults work, the kinds of issues you're pointing out, they're problematic, and we need to get back to paying attention to what these are, which is schools, not warehouses. Thanks for coming. I appreciate it.
Yeah.